warriors marching to war and slaughter must seek the favor of the gods.
Hi guys, welcome to part 2. In this video, we're going to talk about the gods and the god favor system. We'll cover how it relates to both marketing and how the game will impact Warhammer 3 and the next historical titles. But I must warn you, this video will feature a lot of my speculation. And to understand some of my speculation better, you may want to watch part 1 first. First off, it's important to know the sources I'll be using to make my speculations. I have read the Iliad in many different dialects of ancient Greek. I have also read it in Latin, so I do consider myself very knowledgeable in this area of myth. In the actual time of Homer, this story called the Iliad was told word of mouth as a spoken poem, or basically as a rap. Honest to Zeus, not lying. Homer probably was alive in the 12th century BC and was very famous for being a poetic rapper. Homer, like Tupac or Elvis, was so widely famous that he remained revered and respected for his musical talent long after his death, and his immense fame lasted the course of centuries. After his death in the 12th century BC, these epic poems were told after the actual historical event that took place sometime in the 13th or 12th century BC, and they were spoken again and again over centuries by word of mouth or orally. So the story of the Iliad does have a lot of variations in it, depending on what dialect or language it is written in, because of the centuries of oral storytelling that preceded it being written down. And that storytelling is what added the immense amount of mythological fantasy to the story. As you might see, it's impossible to get to the full truth of the Trojan War without going through the myth of it first. And this probably highlights why Creative Assembly, they're taking this approach to do the truth behind the myth, because a lot of what we have about the Trojan War, it's just mixed so much with myth that it's probably the right approach for this specific Total War title. We start to get the first copies of the Iliad in written ancient Greek dialects like Aeolic, Doric, and Ionic around 8th century BC. After looking at the ancient Greek IB test, which they used in the UK, and that includes England, I can see the British academics probably favor the Doric ancient Greek dialect, and Creative Assembly is a British company. But I believe the most popular translation of the Iliad and Odyssey is the dialect Attic Iconic. So I'll be basing most of what I say on the stories from these two dialects. Religion was very important to the Bronze Age Greeks, and that is the reason the Iliad heavily talks about the pantheon of Greek gods and their favor towards different factions, rulers, and heroes. Commoners and rulers alike would base their actions heavily on the perceived relationship to the pantheon. While the pantheon of Greek gods is definitely not real, the idea of them existing throughout ancient Greece affected trade, travel, government, war, and personal relationships in a very real way. In Total War Saga Troy, the gods are technically not real, but your faction's perceived relationship with the individual gods do affect your faction in concrete ways. Of the gods, I speculate that there will be at least 5 gods that are important or extremely relevant in the saga. I will discuss the possibility of 7 gods as well, which I believe as being more likely. The confirmed gods are Hera, Aphrodite, Ares, and Poseidon. These are the gods that are confirmed to be in the game. But before I mention the other gods that I believe will be in the game as well, let's divide up the gods we know will be in the game based on support for Greeks or Trojans. So how the Trojan War started, well, at least mythically, is that Zeus had some joker toss an apple with an inscription that read, "To the fairest of them all," between Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, meaning that the apple would go to the hottest babe in the bunch. Obviously, all the goddesses thought the apple was meant for them, and this started a bit of a feud. I believe some obscure Doric versions have Nike there as well, but Athena basically tells her off, like super mean girl style, saying like, "You're super basic, Nike, and have a weird body. The apple was definitely not meant for you." So Nike wanders off, like kind of embarrassed and like obviously like has her feelings hurt and like mumbles, "Why are the popular girls at my pantheon so mean?" So maybe if you play as Sparta Menelaus, you might get a decision involving Nike and Athena at the beginning of the game. But most likely, I speculate that Nike won't be very relevant to this game, especially as the vast number of versions only have Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite fighting over the apple. Zeus started this fight on purpose, because he wanted to start the Trojan War to get rid of overpopulation, as he thought the world had too many people. But mostly, He wanted to start the war to kill off his bastard demigod children, as he feared that one day he would be overthrown from Olympus, the same way he overthrew his father. Killing off his demigod bastard offspring was his main goal in starting the Trojan War. Zeus sent the 3 goddesses to Paris to settle the dispute, knowing full well what would happen. Paris was a shepherd in most versions I read, although he was raised by bears in some versions of the story. But regardless, his family had expelled him, simply because they had a bad dream about his birth. So Paris is unaware of his royal birth, and he basically only has sheep or bears as friends. When the goddesses appeared to him, they all showed up completely buck-ass naked, each trying to get the edge with their bodacious bodies. Paris was so overcome by their beauty that he went into the equivalent of shock caused by horniness. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each strutted their stuff, but none of the foxy ladies could outcompete the other. Paris honestly couldn't pick, so they all resorted into bribing him with awesome stuff. Athena offered him military might, and Hera offered him rule over all of Asia Minor. But he chose Aphrodite's bribe, which was to help him seduce the most beautiful woman alive. And that woman, of course, was Helen of Troy. Or, well, she was just known as Helen at this point. And as you might have expected, both Athena and Hera were extremely angry and jealous that Aphrodite was awarded the apple. And these 3 women basically have a catfight throughout the entire Trojan War. I mean, and also obviously their catfight basically starts the Trojan War with Zeus, being the one behind it all, pulling the strings. You might be like, Nuccio, aren't you worried about calling this a catfight? It's 2020, not the Bronze Age. Nope. I used a literal cat in my reenactment, so I have catfight immunity. The 2 goddesses from the confirmed gods that will never switch sides from Greek to Trojan or Trojan to Greek is Hera and Aphrodite. Hera, extremely jealous of Aphrodite, will remain furious at Paris and all the other Trojans for the rest of the war, so she will be supporting the Greeks almost indefinitely in my view. So we'll put her down with the Greeks. Also, I imagine whatever Trojan faction has Paris in it will get the worst part of her wrath. Obviously, Aphrodite favors Paris for picking her. She rescues him from Menelaus and grants him other favors throughout the war. Aphrodite will be supporting the Trojans almost indefinitely in my view. Plus, she holds a major grudge against Menelaus, because originally, when Helen's father promised Helen's hand to Menelaus, Menelaus promised to make some kind of sacrifice to Aphrodite. The sacrifice itself differs depending on the version, but the main thing is Menelaus forgets to do it, and Aphrodite holds a grudge against him for forgetting to do the sacrifice. And he is a major figure to the Greek side. But perhaps this grudge will only matter to the Greek faction Sparta and not be held against the other Greek factions as heavily. I think whether there are 5 or 7 gods in the game, it doesn't matter. Hera and Aphrodite will be locked into the Greeks and Trojans respectively. And I have reason to believe that both will give bonuses to public order, but the other bonuses probably depend on your faction's leader. Now, going on to the next 2 gods that are confirmed, I believe they both will be able to help both sides to varying degrees. And it's going to depend on the faction, different events, what the other factions are doing. But they'll still have a very concrete affinity to one side or the other. And these gods are Poseidon and Ares. And again, they're confirmed to be in the game. Ares does help the Greeks a tad at first when his mother, Hera, persuades him to help the Greeks. But he ends up doing whatever Aphrodite wants him to do in the end. And as the Trojan War goes on, Ares becomes more and more fanatically Trojan. And the reason why he gets brought down that path is because Ares is easily tricked into doing Aphrodite's bidding because he is so influenced by Aphrodite's feminine wiles. So he will have an affinity for the Trojan side of the conflict, and that is a reason we will put him with the Trojans. Ares will give military bonuses as he is the god of war, and to reiterate, he will probably start off favoring the Trojans, slightly, and then as the conflict goes on, how the Trojan factions interact with him and Aphrodite, he will probably, most games become more and more fanatically Trojan. But he may also help other Greek factions if conditions are right. Poseidon is far more Greek favored than Ares is Trojan favored. But the main reason why Poseidon is so Greek favored is because he holds a very, very strong grudge against Laomedon, the Trojan king. Basically, it's a dwarf level Book of Grudges grudge. Poseidon honestly doesn't really necessarily like the Greeks. He honestly doesn't really like anyone. He is like the same level of asshole you would find in like Dr. House, mixed with like an old grumbler. Like he's a grudger and an asshole. But because of his strong grudge, we'll say he has an affinity for the Greeks and put him down with the Greeks. So we know from PC Gamer magazine that the vanilla game will launch with 8 different factions. And we know that Hector and his grandfather Laomedon, and Laomedon is the Trojan king, by the way, we know that they will both be in separate factions. And we know this from this PC Gamer quote. If you're playing for the other side, maybe as Hector, the Trojan prince, you can forget all about doing your old man's bidding and steal Troy for yourself. Or you could just hop in a boat and head to Greece, cutting your enemies off before they set sail. So from this quote, we get a lot of information. We know that Laomedon and Hector will be in 2 different Trojan factions. We know there's at least 2 Trojan factions. And from this, I'm going to guess that the Laomedon Trojan faction will have a lot more wrath from Poseidon, because Poseidon really hates this guy. I'm not sure if Hector will really get the same wrath from Poseidon. I mean, also it talks about him sailing and using the sea very easily. I mean, granted, it's a lot of speculation, but I really think that Poseidon will hold a very special grudge for the Trojan faction that has Laomedon in it. Laomedon, I mean. So obviously Poseidon is the god of the sea and will give naval buffs. It's also confirmed that he will give naval buffs on the actual Total War FAQ pages, but he's also the god of horses. So he may give buffs relating to chariots as well. So if there are 7 important gods in the saga instead of 5, I believe that Poseidon, like Hera, will be affixed indefinitely with the Greeks, and that Apollo will be an important god in the saga, and like Aphrodite, Apollo will be affixed indefinitely with the Trojans. Poseidon will give naval buffs and cavalry buffs, while Apollo will grant buffs to range units, casualty replenishment, siege defenders, and perhaps give public order bonuses, as he is the god of archery, healing, medicine, music, and poetry. Now, to balance out Ares on the Trojan side, I believe the Greeks will get Athena on the Greek side. She isn't necessarily the god of war, but she is definitely known for martial prowess, and she'll give military buffs in the same way that Ares gives military buffs. So both the Greeks and Trojans will have a similar way to get military buffs. Now for the 5th or 7th god that I speculate will be a major god to the saga, I believe he will be Zeus. But I believe that he will operate very differently than the other gods. So my speculation for Zeus, and this is a big speculation, he has not been confirmed, I just want to make sure, is that he's always going to favor the underdog. Whether it's the Greeks or the Trojans, if one side is losing, he's going to favor that side. Because you got to remember, Zeus's main goal in starting the Trojan War is for it to never end. Like, he wants it to go on for as long as possible so that he can kill off as many demigods and humans as possible. In the Iliad, it talks about his desire to perpetually continue the war indefinitely. And if he had the power to do so, he would have done it, but he isn't as powerful as probably some may think. I believe that in the game, if a major portion of the pantheon disfavors a certain side or possibly a certain faction to a large enough degree, Zeus will publicly never support that side, even if that side is the de facto underdogs at the time, because Zeus cannot politically afford to go against the majority of the gods he has rule over. He is not strong enough to stave off a coup from the majority of the pantheon. So you might be thinking after I said that, wait. Like, Zeus is the most powerful of the Greek gods, right? He's the supreme deity of the Greek pantheon. He can do whatever he wants, yada, yada, yada. No one can touch Zeus. You're not quite, actually. So yes, Zeus is the ruler of the Greek gods on Mount Olympus. He is also he is immensely powerful. And yes, he is the supreme deity of the Greek pantheon, but his power, rule, and order can still be challenged by other gods and other entities. These other entities being like demigods, titans, etc. He is not immune to mutiny, and the power level of a supreme deity with a lowercase g is still exceptionally low compared to the power of a modern day god with a capital G. So before any of you bust out your fedora and ask why a perceived power level of a god is relevant, it is relevant to the people who believe in it, albeit being the ancient Greeks, and or are aware of its concepts, that being you. So even if you are an atheist, your concept of a god is probably related to the Western sense of the Judeo-Christian Islamic god, a god with a capital G. A capital G god lives completely outside of our space and time, yet can perceive multiple spaces and times simultaneously, is omnipotent, cannot be destroyed, and is beyond mortal comprehension. Likewise, Christians, Jews, and Muslims have a hugely different relationship with their capital G god than the ancient Greek people had with Zeus and the rest of the pantheon's lowercase g gods. So with the concept of a lowercase g god versus a capital G god, we know that Zeus can be destroyed. He is very smart, but he is not omnipotent. He is immensely powerful, but he is still bound by the same space and time that binds humans to this reality. He cannot escape that. In many ways, the Greek gods are more human and relatable than the god of the three modern-day Western religions. But the pantheon gods are far more flawed, not very benevolent, and have trouble controlling their impulses and emotions, just like humans do. So to reiterate, Zeus cannot just do anything he wants. He, just like a mortal human king or dictator, he could be overthrown. He could be destroyed. Things could not go well for him. I mean, and remember too, is he overthrew his father overthrew his grandfather, and so on. It's not like it hasn't happened before. And his main goal and purpose is to maintain power and order on Mount Olympus. He will never favor a side that could possibly cost him support from the majority of the pantheon, as that is far more dangerous than a single demigod, that might, get a little bit more powerful one day. Zeus as a fifth or seventh god will operate very differently than the other six gods we discuss. His favor and actions to each faction and to each side will be determined by two competing factors, both relative power level between the Greeks and Trojans and the favor the rest of the pantheon has towards either the Greeks or Trojans or individual factions. The pantheon's favor will be calculated by both positive and negative relationships among the various gods with different people that make up the 8 different factions. Each alliance and faction will receive negative or positive actions from Zeus depending on all this favor being added up. So in other words, each faction in the game, I believe, will have lots of events involving lots of other Greek gods. These events will be scripted, with some events having different outcomes based on player decisions. The other gods will influence Zeus through their collective opinion, meaning that Zeus will add up all the different opinions like a politician would, basically pull their base or their state. And his favor is going to be determined on what the majority of the gods think. So individual gods like Artemis or Demeter or Hephaestus, who are not very relevant to the conflict, will still influence Zeus with their positive or negative relationship with your faction, your heroes, your leader, your generals, etc. And it's possible that other actions certain leaders take, generals and heroes, will affect this relationship to the pantheon as well. I also believe how your faction interacts with other factions will affect this relationship as well, depending on those factions' relationship with the gods. So now I want to start tying this to Three Kingdoms, Warhammer, parts thinking, holistic thinking, and how this god favor system is going to affect Troy in targeting the Chinese market. Again, if you haven't watched part 1 yet, you're might get a little lost this next part. But basically, let's make up an example with 2 Greek factions. Let's say Sparta and Mycenae. So let's say that Sparta has poor favor with the majority of the pantheon, and also poor favor with Athena. But Sparta has strong favor with Hera and Poseidon. Then let's say that Mycenae has great favor with the pantheon gods and great relationships with Hera, Athena, and Poseidon. Basically, Mycenae is solid with all the gods that matter to the Greeks. And then let's say that Mycenae and Sparta make a trade agreement and agree on a military access agreement. This will decrease Mycenae's favor with the Pantheon and Athena, even though it might increase Mycenae's favor with Poseidon and Hera to a degree. And obviously, like, that's kind of their price for getting these agreements. They'll be affected a little bit negatively. But Sparta will get an increase in every god relationship that matters. And obviously, this interaction is more beneficial to Sparta than it was to Mycenae. And I think you can start to see that that's a little bit of flavor from Three Kingdoms. And so you will cover, I think with this base, how Troy's God favor system is really a perfect blend of components parts thinking that is found in Warhammer mixed with the holistic thinking style found in Three Kingdoms. So going over to Warhammer 2, we're going to see how all the Lord authority scheme and the hero and Lord buffs are pretty modular. So I'm playing as Cleostra, and if we look at her army, she's the Lord of this army, and so she gives a lot of Lord buffs that will only pertain to this army because, like, this is her army, and those Lord buffs only apply here. She has faction effect buffs that affect everything in her faction, but basically those are only going to affect the units in here. When we go to the agent like these two, they will give more winds of magic, and all units like her and him or her, or she's a girl, they can use the winds of magic, and it kind of fills that global pool. But if you go to an agent like this, who's a ballistic expert, you have to put him near the ranged units for him to give his buffs to them. Like, it's not enough for him just to be in the army. He has proximity needed to give these buffs. And so basically following that, this is very, simplified, but you can see that this is a very component modular system in giving these buffs and authority scheme. I mean, there definitely are factions like the Vampire Coast and elves, the Dark Elves and the Skaven. They have a loyalty scheme too, which is still pretty modular for a relationship. Most of all, like, these relationships do not matter with the other the relationships between the heroes, the generals. It doesn't really matter too much. It doesn't matter at all in most cases. All right, so let's move over to Three Kingdoms now. So now going over to Three Kingdoms, we can see that we have a more holistic style in how we deal with our lords, agents, generals, and that every character can fulfill these roles. So this guy is one of our, generals, not our general, but one of our, officers in this army, I guess. But we can make him the commander. Let's not do that though. We could put him on this board. We could give him a position. We could remove all these units from him, and then we could send him on an assignment. And then if we had it unlocked, we could send him to be a spy. So looking back at this, like, all the characters, they have a lot of potential to do a lot of different things. And looking at the army in particular, let's look at our commander. So if we look at it here, we see that his retinue, which is these units here, these 6 units, will get, melee armor piercing damage buff, melee damage buff. But then his own army, like, that's all the units in here, they'll receive more replenishment from this, from fanaticism. And so you can see is that his relationship to everything is really what makes the buffs do things or not do things. So because he has a closer unity with his own retinue, they're going to get more buffs than the rest of the army. But even though he is the commander and he's still here in this, or he doesn't need to be the commander, he just needs to be in the army, he's still going to give everyone that replenishment buff. And it works for the same with all the other characters. But if we were go to, say here, if I had this unlocked, he would get +5 military supplies in enemy territory because he is the commander. And he would only get that when he's commanding, when he's fulfilling that authority role. So that's kind of the big difference, is that, the relationship off the battlefield matters more than where everything's placed on the battlefield in this game. So that's the idea, is that, you know, in the battlefield, we could give all these units to him or yada yada, put them in their own group and move them away. But they'll still get those bonuses because they spent so much time before the battle. Then going on from there, like if we go to here, we look at the characters, like their relationships with each other. We covered this in part 1, so I won't get too far into it. But that matters a lot too. So if we see here, where is it? Where are you, bud? There you go. So you look at here, can see that he has good relationships with both of his generals. And you can see from that check mark right here. So this is a very good army in the sense of harmony, is that the commander, everyone likes the commander. They have all good relationships, and that's going to flow down to these units here. This is a very well-functioning army, and the buffs and bonuses are not going to be heated. Everyone's satisfied. Well, you guys can be a little bit more satisfied. But yeah, that's basically Three Kingdoms in a nutshell. That's how it's holistic, and that's how the authority, the filial piety system of authority and bonuses work. So to reiterate, the God favor system that I believe will be found in Total War Saga Troy will fuse both Warhammer's parts-based authority scheme and Lord Hero bonus system that we discussed with the holistic filial piety authority scheme and character bonus system found in Three Kingdoms. Like the barter economy system, this system is designed to merge holistic and components parts thinking to get more holistic thinking people into the Warhammer franchise that most of these people captured with Three Kingdoms. And if you watched part 1, you know the end goal of this design is to capture more of the Chinese market in preparation for Warhammer 3. So I know this was a long video. Thank you for sticking with it. I had a lot of fun making it. In the next couple parts, I don't think I'll release them until we get more word from Creative Assembly. I think they'd just be too speculative. Even this one is kind of grasping at straws, I think, a little bit. But I'm really looking forward to making the next parts. I'm hoping that I'm right about a lot of my speculation because that means that Creative Assembly is taking the time to abstract down a lot of different things, like Stellaris level, like Crusader Kings level things, to make better gameplay mechanics. And I think that's going to lead to better historical titles that have a more modern time frame, like Empire, possibly Victorian, Total War. It's going to make a better Warhammer 3. And then also it's just going to allow you, if you really abstract down like parts thinking, holistic style thinking, you get actually from Zeus, we didn't talk about like materialism that comes from the West. It actually starts with the Greeks. So if you're, that materialism versus spiritualism, even though they are lowercase g gods, that's how you get materialism into the West. And so you could, they could make better components for like Prussia that you take to World War I. And then they could even take the Prussian Germanic superiority military style, and then you can make 40K with like Space Marines, the Imperium of Man. I think a lot of this flows together. I think a lot of this, what I see or what I believe, is just going to lead to a better Total War series, and I'm really excited about that. So let me know if you like these videos. I tried my best to I'm not very good at reading from scripts I write. My girlfriend hates watching these. Oh, my fiance now, actually. She hates watching these things. But I'm trying to get better. So just let me know. And look out for part 3. So subscribe, like the video, dislike it if you hate it. And I'll see you guys around. All right, bye.